Good evening. Let's start tonight with something very specific, very narrow, and very real. On January 14th, Ukrainian military units reported that they shot down a drone. That, by itself, is not unusual in this war. Drones cross the sky over Ukraine almost every night. They are tracked, they are intercepted, they are destroyed. That rhythm has become grimly familiar. But this one was different. This was not just any drone. Ukrainian forces say it was a newly identified variant of a Russian Shahed-type drone. And what made it new was not its size, or its flight path, or the way it sounded in the air. What made it new was what it was carrying. According to Ukrainian military reporting, this Shahed-type drone was equipped with a Soviet-era R-60 air-to-air missile. That detail matters. And it matters in a very quiet but very serious way. The report came from the 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces. They are the unit that disclosed this incident. They stated plainly that the drone was shot down, that it was identified after the fact, and that the discovery was made once the wreckage could be examined. No flourish, no exaggeration, just a statement of what they found. You know, sometimes in war reporting, the most consequential moments arrive not with explosions, but with inspection. With someone standing over debris, looking closely, realizing that something has changed. One Ukrainian military unit looked at the remains of this drone and realized it was carrying a missile originally designed for air-to-air combat. A weapon from a different era, a different doctrine, now attached to an unmanned system. And that's where this story begins. Because a Shahed-type drone is already a known quantity. Its role, its use, its presence in this war has been extensively documented. Ukrainian air defenses have been dealing with them for a long time, but this variant was something else. The Ukrainian military did not speculate publicly about why the missile was attached. They did not offer predictions. They did not assign motive. They simply reported what was there. A Soviet-era R-60 air-to-air missile. That missile exists. It has a history. It was designed decades ago for a specific purpose. And on January 14th, it was found mounted on a drone that had been flying over Ukrainian territory. That is the full factual claim. Nothing more, nothing less. And yet the weight of that fact settles in slowly. Because when a military reports that it has encountered a newly identified version of a system it already knows well, that signals adaptation. It signals modification. It signals that someone, somewhere, took an existing platform and decided it needed something extra. This wasn't reported as a test. It wasn't reported as a rumor. It wasn't reported as intelligence chatter. It was reported after the object was physically brought down. That distinction is important. The Ukrainian forces did not say this drone fired the missile. They did not say it attempted to engage anything. They did not say what its intended role was. They said it was there. And sometimes, the presence of a thing tells its own story. The date matters too. January 14th. This is deep into a war that has already consumed years, not weeks or months. By this point, both sides know each other's systems well. They know what to expect in the sky. They know the sounds, the silhouettes, the patterns. So when something new appears, even slightly new, it stands out. One of the quiet truths of modern warfare is that innovation often shows up in fragments, in improvised combinations, in unexpected pairings of old and new. A drone that carries a missile originally built in the Soviet era fits squarely into that pattern. It's not flashy, it's not cinematic, it's almost mundane in its improvisation. But it tells you that the systems in this war are not static. They are being changed, they are being adjusted, they are being reimagined. And the people on the receiving end of those systems are the ones who notice first. The 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces did not release a dramatic narrative. They released a report. They named the date. They identified the object. They described what they found. That restraint is part of what gives the report its gravity. Because the job of a military unit like that is not to tell a story. It's to record reality. And the reality they recorded on January 14th was this. A Shahed-type drone, shot down, newly identified, equipped with a Soviet-era R-60 air-to-air missile. There's a line that keeps coming back to me as I read this report, and it's simple. This is what we found. That's it. No commentary, no adjectives, just the facts. And yet those facts quietly redraw the outline of what's happening overhead. Because once you know this happened once, you have to ask how many times it might happen again. Not as a prediction, not as speculation, but as a question born from evidence. The Ukrainian military did not ask that question out loud. They didn't need to. The existence of this drone, on this date, in this configuration, already asks it for them. And that's where we'll continue. Sometimes the most telling moments in war are the quiet ones, when someone looks down and says very calmly, "This is new." So let's stay with what is known, and only what is known. The Ukrainian military did not discover this drone in the abstract. They encountered it in the course of active defense. It was in the air, it was tracked, it was engaged, and it was brought down. Only after that did its significance become clear. According to the report, the drone was identified as a Shahed-type system. That classification alone places it within a category already familiar to Ukrainian forces. These drones have a known profile. They are recognized by sound, by shape, by behavior. This one fit that profile until it didn't. Because once the wreckage was examined, Ukrainian forces identified that this was a newly identified version. That phrase matters. Newly identified does not mean newly invented. It does not mean experimental. It means this configuration had not been encountered before by the reporting unit. And what distinguished it was the presence of a weapon not normally associated with this type of drone. A Soviet-era R-60 air-to-air missile. The report does not embellish this. It does not describe how the missile was mounted. It does not describe any modifications to the missile itself. It does not describe an attempted use. It simply states that the drone was equipped with it. That restraint is important because it keeps us anchored to what is verifiable. The Ukrainian military did not speculate publicly about why the missile was there. They did not suggest how it might have been used. They did not draw conclusions beyond the physical fact of its presence. And that tells us something about how this information was handled. This was not presented as propaganda. It was presented as documentation. The 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces named themselves as the source. That matters too. This is a unit specifically focused on unmanned systems. Their job is to observe, identify, analyze. They are positioned to notice differences. So when they say this was a new variant, that assessment carries weight within the narrow scope of what they observed. The date again is January 14. That anchors this incident in time. It is not a retrospective claim. It is not a summary of a longer trend. It is a single, date-specific event. One drone, one interception, one discovery. And yet that single data point stands out. Because the R-60 missile is an air-to-air missile. That is its category. That is its designed purpose. It was created in the Soviet era for use by aircraft engaging other airborne targets. That classification is not editorial. It is definitional. The Ukrainian report does not reinterpret that role. It does not claim the missile had been repurposed successfully or unsuccessfully. It does not claim it was operational in this context. It states that it was there. And in investigative reporting, sometimes the most consequential sentence is the simplest one. It was equipped with a missile. There is a quiet finality to that phrasing. Because equipment implies intent, but the report stops short of assigning that intent. It leaves us with a fact pattern, not a narrative arc. A Shahed-type drone, Russian in origin, shot down by Ukrainian forces, carrying a Soviet-era air-to-air missile, reported by the 413th Regiment on January 14. That is the entire evidentiary record made public. And within that record, there is no suggestion of how widespread this configuration might be. There is no claim that this represents a new standard deployment. There is no assertion that this changes the nature of drone operations. Those absences matter. They tell us what was not claimed. They tell us the Ukrainian military was careful not to extend the meaning of the event beyond what could be directly supported. That discipline is part of what makes the report credible. Because in war, especially a long war, there is constant pressure to interpret, to extrapolate, to project. This report does not do that. It documents, it notes, it stops. And yet, even within those limits, the implications quietly accumulate. Because the combination of systems here is unusual. A Shahed-type drone is typically understood as an unmanned aerial vehicle. An R-60 is a missile designed for a piloted aircraft. Bringing those two together is, at minimum, a technical choice. The Ukrainian military does not comment on that choice. They do not describe its rationale. They do not assess its effectiveness. They simply record its existence. And that existence raises questions without answering them, which is often how real investigative stories unfold, not with conclusions, but with artifacts. This is one of those moments where the physical remains of an object become the story. The missile did not need to be fired to be meaningful. It only needed to be present. And that presence was enough for Ukrainian forces to say, publicly and on the record, that they had encountered something new. There are moments when you look at what's left behind and realize the picture has shifted, one might say, even if only slightly. That's the feeling this report conveys, without ever saying so explicitly. The Ukrainian military did not attach adjectives like dangerous or alarming. They did not frame this as escalation. They did not call it a breakthrough. They called it a newly identified version. That phrasing is technical. It is almost bureaucratic. And that is precisely why it lands. Because it suggests a process of cataloging, of updating files, of adjusting expectations. One more thing to recognize in the sky. One more thing to prepare for. But again, that is inference. The report itself does not go there. It stays grounded. The drone was shot down. The missile was found. The date was January 14th. The unit was the 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces. Those are the fixed points. Everything else is left unsaid. And sometimes, the unsaid is as important as what is said. Because silence, in this context, is not ignorance, it is caution. It is a decision not to outrun the evidence. And that decision matters when information can move faster than verification. This report does not move fast. It moves carefully. And that care is what allows us to trust the contours of the story as it has been presented. We are not being asked to imagine scenarios. We are not being asked to fear possibilities. We are being asked to acknowledge a fact. A new configuration was encountered. That's it. And yet, even that simple acknowledgement changes the mental map. Because once a system is observed once, it enters the realm of the known. It becomes something that can be anticipated, even if its purpose remains unclear. That is how military awareness evolves. Not through grand announcements, but through quiet updates, one report at a time, one wreckage site at a time. This is what we saw, the report effectively says, and now you know too. That's the heart of it. No drama, no flourish. Just the steady accumulation of facts. And with that accumulation comes a subtle shift in understanding. Not because the report tells us what to think, but because it shows us what exists. And in a war defined by adaptation, that alone is significant. And so we arrive at the end of what can be responsibly said. Not because the story is finished in the world, but because the facts, as presented, are finished on the page. On January 14th, Ukrainian military units shot down a drone. That drone was identified as a Shahed-type system. Upon examination, it was determined to be a newly identified variant. And that variant was equipped with a Soviet-era R-60 air-to-air missile. Those facts stand. They are discrete. They are contained. And the way they were released matters just as much as what they contain. The Ukrainian military did not wrap this incident in narrative framing. They did not situate it within a broader arc. They did not use it to argue a case or advance a theory. They reported it. That choice in itself is instructive. Because in a conflict where information is constantly being interpreted, reframed, and redeployed, the act of stopping at the edge of verification is a deliberate one. The 413th Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Forces put their name on this report. They tied it to a date. They described what was found, and then they stopped. No follow-up claims, no implied trajectory, no suggestion of what comes next, just a record. And that is where we too have to stop. Not because curiosity is satisfied, but because discipline demands it. This incident does not come with an official explanation of intent. It does not come with a description of operational use. It does not come with an assessment of effectiveness or failure. It comes with evidence. And evidence, by itself, does not tell a full story. It tells a true one. There is a temptation, especially when confronted with something new, to rush forward, to connect dots that have not yet been drawn, to turn a single data point into a pattern. But that temptation is precisely what this report resists. It does not say this is the future of drone warfare. It does not say this will change the course of the conflict. It does not say this represents escalation or innovation or desperation. It says this existed, on this day, in this form. And that restraint is worth noting, because it reflects an understanding that facts gain power not when they are stretched, but when they are held in place. One clear fact, properly bounded, can matter more than a dozen speculative conclusions. This is where we are, a voice like this might say quietly. This is what we can prove. That, in many ways, is the moral center of responsible reporting, especially in wartime, especially when the stakes are real and immediate and human. The Ukrainian military did not ask the public to feel a certain way about this discovery. They did not frame it as shocking or alarming. They did not attach emotional language. They allowed the object itself to carry the weight: a drone, a missile, a date, a unit. Those elements, placed together, form a factual constellation. Nothing more is required. And nothing more should be added. Because once you move beyond that constellation, you are no longer reporting what happened. You are imagining what it might mean. And imagination, however compelling, is not evidence. So we sit with what we know. We know that this configuration was encountered. We know it was shot down. We know it was examined. We know it was reported. And we know that the reporting stopped there. That stopping point is not a failure of information. It is a boundary. It tells us where certainty ends. And in a conflict that produces a constant flood of claims, that boundary is a form of clarity. There is something almost old-fashioned about this kind of report. It feels like a dispatch from a different era of journalism and military communication. An era where the goal was not to dominate the narrative, but to document reality. This is what happened, the report says implicitly. Draw no conclusions we did not draw. And that invitation to restraint is rare. It asks the audience to do something difficult, to be informed without being inflamed, to register a development without immediately assigning it a trajectory, to acknowledge novelty without projecting consequence. That is not an easy posture to maintain, especially when the subject is war. But it is the posture this report models. And so, in closing, what can be said is simple. On January 14th, Ukrainian forces encountered something they had not seen before. They identified it. They documented it. They shared that documentation. They did not embellish it. They did not extend it. They did not weaponize it rhetorically. They left it where it was found. There are moments when the facts are enough, one might say, and this is one of them. That is where this story rests. Not because it lacks importance, but because its importance lies precisely in its specificity. One drone, one missile, one report. Everything else remains unwritten. And for now, that is exactly as it should be.